We went through the doctor's opinion. Again, we're going through the first 103 pages. We're going through the steps in the big book. And we went through the doctor's opinion, Bill's story, and there's a solution. Now we're on page 30, more about alcoholism. Most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. So the real alcoholics, and we read about this in the last chapter, there's a solution. There are 3 types of alcoholics. We could say 3 types of compulsive eaters. A lot of times we could talk about other addictions. And this, they're talking about the real alcoholic, the real compulsive eater. That's right in the first sentence there. So it's letting us know that we're a certain variety, because if we're just a moderate, we could stop compulsively drinking or eating. You know, somebody says, hey, you're looking a little bit more heavier, or whatever it is, or we have a reason to, we could stop. If you're the more heavier type of alcoholic or compulsive eating, if something really serious comes along, you can stop. But if you're the real hopeless variety, alcoholic or compulsive eater, we have a real solution for you, which nothing else could have cured. And it's going to talk about this in this page and the next page. This is actually, we're on page 30 for anybody coming in, and it's more about alcoholism. And it's actually step 1, because it says if you're the real alcoholic. No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally. Here we're talking about bodily, meaning allergy of the body, mentally obsession of the mind, leads to the phenomenon of craving. So here right away, the second sentence in this chapter is opening up the whole thing to us. It's amazing how this book, every sentence is so important, every word. Mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. The next sentence says, the idea that somehow, someday we will control and enjoy his drinking is a great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The word control is so interesting here. Again, these words are so powerful, control. What does step 1 say? I have the steps right here. I like to call this is my diet plan right in front of me. We admitted we were powerless over food or over alcohol. In food, it's an Overeaters Anonymous, and alcohol, and Alcoholics Anonymous, and our lives have become unmanageable. Use the control here. Right away, they're going into we're trying to control it. That someday he will or we will control it. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. How many diets do we have to try? How many times do we have to control? And again, it's related to everything in our lives. Our best thinking got us here. So how are we going to be able to do it? He may pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. So a lot of us have been locked up because of our addiction. And how many people, they said, jail or death, right, are the 2 ways out of the situation. So right away, the first paragraph says a lot. Pretty amazing when you think how they packed everything in there. We learned, the second paragraph on page 30 of more about alcoholism, that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we're like other people or presently may be has to be smashed. The words there is so like it vividly tells you exactly, has to be smashed. There's no doubt about it that we're like others in relation to this. We, alcoholics or compulsive eaters, are like men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. We know no other real alcoholic ever recovers control. It goes on to talk about the same thing. Time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. We get worse, never better, it goes on to say. On the top of 31, we have tried every imaginable remedy. So we've tried everything. Everything we've tried. How many diets do we have to go on in relation to the food? In some cases, there have been brief periods of recovery, followed always by a still worse relapse. Think about it. This applies to most everyone here. Physicians who are familiar with alcoholism agree there is no such thing as making a normal drinker out of an alcoholic. Science may one day accomplish this, but it hasn't done so yet. So here this is written in 1939. They started, I guess, in 38. And it's saying science has not accomplished this. So here we are. We went to the internet. We've gone to the moon. Surely the scientists and doctors and experts and PhDs have figured out a solution to our problem. in all these years later. You would think, because he says here, science may one day accomplish this. But guess what? I haven't seen, if anybody here has seen, has the doctors, the pills, and we're going to read about all of this, have they figured it out? Again, this was written 90 years ago. By every form of self-deception, experimentation, they will try to prove themselves exceptions to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic. You keep on trying to prove this. Now, in the second full paragraph, it says, here are some of the methods we tried. Now, this is really good because I'm going to compare this to alcoholism and Overeaters Anonymous. It's food addiction. I have the 12 and 12 here, which also talks about it here. Here are some of the methods we tried. These are all at step one. We tried on self-will. Drinking beer only, limiting the number of drinks, never drinking alone, never drinking in the morning, drinking only at home, having in the house, never drinking during business hours, drinking only at parties, switching from scotch to brandy, drinking only natural. We could apply this to all the different types of food, but I'm going to read directly about food in a minute. Swearing off forever without, taking more physical exercise, reading inspirational books, that shelves full of self-help and inspirational books, going from health farms to sanitariums. How many of us have done that? Going to health farms, accepting voluntary commitment to asylums. We could increase the list ad infinitum. Now here it is. That's alcoholism, and a big book, but here it is on page 10. This is the 12 steps and 12 traditions of Overeaters Anonymous, as you can see here, and it relates it to Overeaters Anonymous. On the page 10, first full paragraph, then horrified by what we were doing to ourselves with food, we became obsessed with diets. It's similar to, it's amazing. We spent lots of money on weight loss schemes. We bought all sorts of appetite suppressants. We joined diet clubs and fitness centers. We had ourselves hypnotized and analyzed. We had major surgery on our digestive systems. We had our ears stapled, our jaws wide shut. All of this we did willingly, hoping that we could one day eat all we want and be free of compulsion. Some of us went from doctor to doctor looking for a cure. The doctors gave us diets. We had no better success with those than we had with other diets we've been on. The doctors prescribed shots and pills. These worked for a while, but inevitably lost control and overate again, putting back on weight. We had worked so hard to lose and frequently gaining more. Many of us tried fasting with and without a doctor's supervision. Usually we lost weight. So it goes on and on to say we tried purging ourselves, vomiting, laxatives, or excessive exercise. Our weight went down sometimes to dangerous levels, but we still felt fat. We put the weight back on. So this is step one. We're powerless. Step two, it's also step two. We had to be restored to sanity. So it tells us everything we need to know here about our disease and our alcoholism. The only thing is when you read this and how it could become very depressed and despondent. There's no answer. And how many times have we tried? But we did read about it. We read about the doctor's opinion where the doctor said all the synthetic knowledge doesn't work. He said that all of this didn't work. And there's a solution that told us that we couldn't, like Roland Hazard went to see Dr. Jung and he said he knew the mainsprings of the mind. He said he figured out all the intellectual processes. He understood how the mind worked, but yet he was drunk in no time. So it's telling us here what the problem is and that we can't figure it out. On page 31, we do not like to promise any individual alcoholic, but you can quickly diagnose yourself. Step over to the nearest barroom and try some controlled drinking. This has to go with the compulsive eating, right? Same thing. It will not take long for you to decide if you are honest with yourself about it. It may be worth a bad case of jitters if you get a full knowledge of your condition. So then it goes on to the stories about a man named 30. And here's the story of a man. He was drinking. He started drinking. It's on page 32. And he started to realize he had to wake up Monday mornings, but it was affecting his job. He couldn't function. It was more important for him to be successful. So he sort of had this drinking habit, but it didn't go to the extent where he was the real alcoholic. But what happened was for 30 years, or was it 20, he didn't indulge because he wanted to do well. And he did very successful his work. Then he thought when he retired that he could possibly drink again, because he didn't have to work. He didn't have that problem. And he started taking that first drink. 2 months later, he was in a hospital, puzzled and humiliated. Every attempt to recover failed, so he died in a few months.
If you liked the video so far, press the like and subscribe button.
And it says on page 33, this case contains a powerful lesson. It's telling us a lesson most of us have believed, that if we remained sober for a long stretch, we could thereafter drink normally. But here the man who, at 55 years, found he was where he had left off at 30. So that was, it was 25 years ago. Once an alcoholic, it says, always an alcoholic, commencing to drink after a period of time, we were on a short time as bad as we ever been. And this is where the famous sentence goes. I remember on page 33, because 33 reminds me, it's like two twisted numbers. I guess you could look at it that way. So if somebody asks you, remember 33, it says next paragraph, because of the peculiar mental twist always required. That peculiar mental twist, people talk about something in the brain, twisted in your brain, it makes us a compulsive eater, a compulsive alcoholic. So we go on to page 34. Near about the second sentence in the first paragraph, where we could quit on our own willpower. We're beyond the point, it says right before that. Oh, I'm going to go right to page 35. So in the first top there, so we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking. It talks about Jim here, and Jim's story, and it says near the middle of the last paragraph, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. So it's starting to talk about his spiritual life. And it goes on to say the experiences Jim talks about. In 36, Jim goes through life talking about, he says, I, and I have it underlined here. So it's all about Jim. Bill, and Bill's story talks about the same thing. So it's all about him and him trying to figure it out through his own willpower and figuring out life. And if only he had done this better, worked better, did something better. But he goes on to say, on italics on page 36, it's the famous story about where he goes into a bar, where there's actually a bar there, but he went there to have a sandwich. And he figured he had a great idea. If he had some whiskey in his milk, then it wouldn't be a problem. But he was a real alcoholic, and before no time, it didn't work out. So he started one more journey on the last paragraph 36 to asylum for Jim. And it says on the again, he had much knowledge in italics on the very bottom about himself as an alcoholic, yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if he mixed it with milk. Come to our free Zoom meeting, see info and description. Now back to our video. Whatever precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. Step 2, being restored to sanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? It ran in the middle of the second paragraph some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. I like the paragraph on page 37 about the third full paragraph. In some circumstances, we have gone out deliberately to get drunk or compulsively eat, feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. But even this just type of beginning, we are obliged to admit that our justification for a spree was insanely insufficient, for the like was always happen. Then we have the jaywalker. Okay, the jaywalker is a story about a guy who keeps on, like it says here, we're insane, we keep on repeating the same thing. And he keeps on going out, and on page 38, he keeps on getting hit by cars, but he still goes out and does the same repeated action. Again, it's trying to tell us. And also, it says on page 38, after he does all of this a million times, I like on the second full paragraph, however intelligent we may have been in other respects where alcoholism or food addiction has been involved, we have been strangely insane. So again, the experts couldn't figure it out, the doctors and all the intellect we use, we couldn't figure it out. No matter how intelligent in each story, there's, Jim and Fred, they're really intelligent people. And the man of 30, he was very successful in his business. But it's saying here, no matter how intelligent you are, no matter how much you use your intelligence, it's saying here, we can't figure it out. And it says on page 39, because their brains and bodies, the middle second paragraph, like the first full paragraph, have been damaged as ours were but the actual potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on basis of self-knowledge. So it's telling us we absolutely can't do it on self-knowledge. I had self-help books. I had everything. I went to all these diet programs, trying to figure it out through the self, through the knowledge. If only I had a better knowledge. People have PhDs in dietary things, and all the experts couldn't figure it out. And I talked about, again, I'll say, that lecture I went to about 2 months ago, about 2 hours long, all the doctors, experts there that had all kinds of ways to do it medically and physically, and all these exercises and what to do, what not to do, and all this intellect. Never once did I heard the word spirituality. So they were trying to figure it out. And I know 95% of people go to these experts, they fail. And the 5% who stay on their diets are miserable. So all those experts couldn't do it by self-knowledge, so how can we? Matter of fact, self-knowledge takes us away from the solution, right? We're into the self. Because in every story, it talked about they were into themselves. They said, I can do it, I this, I will do that, I will do that. Even Bill, his ego felt he can take care of things. In life, he could be a successful stockbroker, or he could be a successful golf. Expectations or resentments ready to happen. There's only one solution that it found, and this solution, what's great about it is it affected every area of my life. When I use it towards alcoholism, food addiction, I realized it could affect and help every area. Then there's Fred. It says on page 39, it started Fred as a partner in a well-known accounting firm, but it says he has so attractive personality that he makes friends with everyone. To all appearance, he is stable, well-balanced individual, yet he's an alcoholic. So we go through our lives, and we in our careers, our family life, everything seems we can do and everything so well, but yet we meet up against this addiction. We have an allergy of the body, obsession of mind leads to a phenomenon of craving. So here he is. He's talking about Fred, how Fred was a great guy and everything. Near the bottom, Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic, much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problem. So many people come into this program and they're working with the steps, and we don't, my first 2 years, didn't want to expect a spiritual remedy. All the whole 12 steps are about are spiritual awakening, spiritual remedy. But we live in such a secular age. The meetings came out of the rehabs, and when they first started in the 70s, and I think that's why a lot of people got more secular and made it group therapy, because they would come out of rehab, and a lot of it was about that. So meetings, how many people and I didn't want to accept the spiritual remedy. I wanted my diet program, even in AA, the Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to go in there and share all my problems, and if I could talk to all these people and we could come to an understanding on how I could solve my problem, I'd be able to solve it. I went to all the experts. You could go to therapy, whatever I went to. And I didn't want to really work the steps. I didn't want to say, it was only step one. I didn't want to admit that I was powerless, right? That says everything, step one. I thought I still had the power. Other people had the power. They could help me with this, but it said it's beyond all understanding. So it goes on to say very last sentence, he would not accept the spiritual remedy.
If you liked the video so far, press the like and subscribe button.
Self-knowledge would fix it on the bottom near the top of page 40. He figured self-knowledge, just like Roland Hazard went to Dr. Jung, the famous psychology we read about There's a Solution, and he figured it all out, how the mind worked, but he was drunk in no time. So it goes on to say his story, but notice on page 40 he's using the word I again. I can do this, I can do that, everything is I. Just read it, everything, read through that, and you'll see. And he goes on to say, I went to my hotel room on a page of 41. In italics, I crossed the threshold of a dining room. The thought came to the mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. That was all, and nothing more. And then he goes, I did this, I did that. Then came the hospital on the bottom of the first full paragraph, with unbearable mental and physical suffering. In italics, it says, not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. The time he had not thought of consequences at all. Okay, on page 42, he finally realized. He said near the first few sentences near the top, it goes down a few. I knew that from that moment I had an alcoholic mind, right? We have compulsive, real alcohol, hopeless variety, I saw that no willpower, no, step one. Everything I was doing was willpower, this, willpower, that. And self-knowledge, it says it all here, would not help in those strange mental blank spots. So it's telling these, in every story here, it says, he goes on to say, and he finally listened. You know, when you're ready, the teacher shall appear on page 42 in the second full paragraph. Then they outlined the spiritual answer. They probably outlined it before. The steps are right up there. And program of action, but he didn't want to hear it, which 100 then followed successfully. So we read forward to the first edition, we have the precise directions how we have recovered. But the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. Here's what he had to do. He realized it meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out of the window, and that was not easy. But the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. Remember we read on page 14. We read with the price that had to be paid. It talks about it through the book, but he talked about it here. And it said on page 14, simple but not easy. Like he said here, it wasn't simple, it was difficult. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. Remember, everybody here was talking about all the stories. I must turn all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. But on page 42, quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. Here's an amazing, amazing sentence. We come in this as alcoholics and compulsive eaters. But imagine that. It says will solve all my problems. That's pretty amazing. All our problems. How many of us came in here? We had all of these problems related, again, to the I, the self, self, self. And that's where the steps come in. And it's saying here that when they work these steps, it'll solve all our problems. I have since brought into a way of living infinitely more satisfying and I hope more useful than the life I lived before. My old manner of life was by no means as a bad one, but I would not exchange the best moments for the worst now. That's amazing. You know, meet calamity with serenity. I love that sentence. I would not go back to it even if I could. And Bill talked about that on page 8. He said, Bill said something very similar, which was very powerful. He said, if you go to page 8, here he talks about a little bit before that, he was in quicksand and loneliness and despair and morass of self-pity. He was overwhelmed. But then he spoke about, I was soon. This is after he realized he had a premonition when he worked through the steps to be catapulted in what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. And here he says the same thing. I was to know peace and happiness and a usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. Incredibly more wonderful as time passes. You know, some people come in the program, they have what they call a pink cloud, and they say, it's going to go away. And usually it does, because they didn't work the steps. They had some hope, maybe this program will work out. But here Bill says, once you work these steps, it'll become incredibly more wonderful as time passes, the happiness, peace, and usefulness. So he goes on to say on page 43, I have profound near the third three-quarters of the way down. He says a little bit above that you were 100% hopeless apart from divine help. There's only one solution. I have profound respect for the spiritual approach in such cases as yours. For most cases, there's virtually no other solution. It's on page 43, the bottom of the second full paragraph. On the very bottom it says, once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink, except in a few rare cases. Neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. So here on step 2, going into step 3, but really basically on step 2, the hope. Step 2, the word there is hope, came to believe a higher power could restore us to sanity. And actually we're not going into, we're going to hear about the shares now, but the next chapter, We Agnostics, is still be on step 2. So here we are, step 2. His defense must come from a power greater than himself. Anybody got the connection between this, what we read here, and our addictions and everything in life? I had somebody call me up, I guess he'd call him a sponsor, whatever. He's obsessing about somebody in his life, a girl, and he can't get off his mind. And I said, if you solve that riddle, you'll solve all the compulsions. I said, you're making it all about something material, something outside of ourselves. Things of the flesh, right? Lust. It's all related. It's a simple program. It's amazing. The food addiction is definitely, there's a way out of this, and it's that spiritual solution. But it's very simple, but it's the hardest thing to accept. So even if you have your upsets, accept your upsets. That's the problem. We're fighting everything. Say, oh, well, I was angry today. Well, accept it. So I said to the person, I said, look, this is what you do. When you're obsessing about this person that no longer wants to be with you, don't fight it, but know the truth. The truth will set you free. The truth with this food addiction, the truth with the alcoholism, it's false. It's not true. It's not going to bring you happiness. And when we start to have the perception idea, and we read there's a solution, the ideas and emotions had to be changed, a whole new concept of life, a new pair of glasses. We start to realize life isn't about all the things that commercial on TV told us. It's not what the movie stars told us. It's not what our parents said we had to be successful, money and success. It's not about that, and that's why we're so miserable. When I was young in my 20s, I wanted to be successful. I wanted to be this and that. No wonder I was miserable. And when I attained certain things, I still wanted more. It was never enough, just like the food. The whole thing is a very simple concept. This is called the spiritual awakening. But as soon as we try to intellectualize it, it's beyond all understanding. I love that phrase too. You try to understand something, it eludes you. You try to understand this food, try to control it. What we need, and people always say, what's the practical application? Need to see God's gift of food, not this man-made food. Enjoying, and I have like the water. This is right here. This is spiritual awakening. When we start to savor the real flavor in water and the essence of it, and not have to go to the things of the drink with 600, 1,200 calories in it. That icky drink, after a while, you appreciate the freshness and this is God-made, right? There you go. You want a practical experience here? Use this during the week. Yeah, we have an answer here. Nothing else was the answer. My life turned around. I mean, things could happen in my life that used to devastate me. I'm in the same situation in my life now as I was before I was miserable. Now I'm happy. A person could be a billionaire and be really upset. How comes that? And a person could be a pauper and be very happy. The same with the food. It's all the same thing. We believe the nonsense that we needed 1,000 calories, all that salt, oil, and sugar, and the poison chemicals that stimulate our brain. People talk about addictions, and you could sit there and you say, well, look at that guy. He's a junkie in the street taking crack or cocaine. And we're no different. We have the drug pushes. We have that drug in our system. It affects the endorphins and the serotonin. But we keep on taking the drug. So don't say how, why can't a person get off drugs when we can't even get off the food? But there is a solution, luckily. I want just a smaller portion. I want to feel lean. I don't want my stomach hanging over my belt, or I don't want to be bloated and all of this fullness and all this goopy food. Then you get the perception change. That's normalcy. The insanity is to think that food is a higher power. It's going to cure our problems. That's insane thinking. But through a spiritual awakening, seeing the life for what it is. The food brings us into the addiction. You see how miserable people on cocaine, heroin, and alcohol are? We become miserable because it's all about the food. And it affects our brain, all the endorphins and the serotonin. Then it's not there, we're miserable, irritable, and discontented. And then we need it. And that becomes not other people, not life in general. It all becomes about the food. You miss all the whole point about what life's all about. We have a solution here. It's interesting. People sometimes say, Bob, where's the practical application? I said, this is my diet program with 12 steps. But we do have things we do discuss here, and you can bring in whatever you want. But basically, we heard, it's a perception change. Ruth said it, Dahlia, everybody else. It's a perception change, I always like, an anorexic wants to not have any food, and that's compulsive. Some binge eaters want a lot of food. What's the difference? It's in the brain. Because one day they're rejecting the food, next day they want more. So we want to be a position of normalcy. There's only one way to do that. And that's with everything in life, is to let it go. It's funny, even with a sleeping problem. I know when, I don't have a real sleeping problem, but I know whenever I think I got to be somewhere the next day and I better get some sleep, I can't fall asleep. When we let go and let God, it's amazing. how things turn out in life. Because the answers are in here. The brain knows how to function. The hypothalamus knows exactly how much food to eat. The receptors in the stomach know how much it wants to be stretched. Actually, the body, there's a feedback mechanism. When your arms and your body gets big, God made it because years ago people had to be able to move around more, right? Do more physical exercise. Unfortunately, we don't do as much today. Or to gather the food even. So there are these mechanisms, but when we try to control and get in the way, the example is if we were to control our breathing, we'd probably stop breathing. If we had control of our heart beating, we'd probably stop too. But we, so, but there is a way to let go and not have control and get centered. And you'll feel when you're not in that fear of the food, you'll feel your stomach getting fuller. And you'll feel that there's more to life than this food. You'll enjoy life and you'll get spiritual, I like to call spiritual bread. You'll fill yourself up with that. And the food, you'll see it for what it is. After a while, you'll look at those donuts or whatever you're talking about, and you won't even relate to it. You say, that's just chemicals in a box. It's like heroin or cocaine or alcohol. I remember when I was in AA, near the beginning when I came in, the guy sponsored me. He said to me, listen, Bob, you don't want to come in here smelling of alcohol and vodka and this and that. And I started to realize, there was more to life than being inebriated and having that buzz in my head and that false synthetic feeling. What do I need that for? It is so much more enjoyable when you're out of the food and you're not addicted. It's amazing. People say all the time when they get off that sugar and everything, life opens up and they feel great and better and see. When I was in my car eating, I didn't see nature or beauty of anything because I was making food my higher power. Yep, we get to enjoy our diet. Can you imagine that? Some people, 5% of people manage to stay on a diet, but they're miserable. But we can enjoy these healthy foods.